welcome to another episode of Making Mexico Home, Interesting People Edition. Today I'm here with George Reavis. George is a very interesting person. I met George through a mutual friend. Her name is Desiree. Thank you, Desiree. George and I talked on the phone, and what George does is he has a way to transfer money basically from Canadian dollars to US dollars into Mexico, but I think we'll talk more, but I think he also has the ability to do it a lot bigger area. And one of the comments that I told George was, man, you're going to be a billionaire someday because this idea is really, really good. It's just a matter of how do we get that idea out there. So tell us a little bit, George, about how you got into this and then why your product is so unique.
For sure. But first, I just want to say, before we met through Desiree, I've followed your stuff on Instagram for a long time.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate the content. It's cool to watch other expats who have moved to Mexico and your sort of honest approach to explaining just what it's like to move here and then assimilate that to sort of my experiences. Yeah. It's just cool to watch that stuff, and I've appreciated your content a bunch.
I'm going to piggyback on what you said just a minute, because I was just in Vegas, right? They're doing things in the U.S. now that I never thought would happen. So people in the U.S. are concerned about safety when they come to Mexico, right? So I'm in Vegas, and I need to get deodorant and shampoo and a couple other things. All that shit's locked up. So I go to a Walgreens. All of that stuff is
crazy.
It's locked.
It's crazy.
And you have to call a clerk over there to open it up because because people are stealing stuff all the time. The bathrooms, I don't know how you get into a bathroom out there. And my mom said California is the exact same way. And then you have homeless people all over the place. I mean, and then people are there afraid of, safety in Mexico. And I'm thinking, man, there's no comparison.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting. So anyway, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
that's so true.
What got you into this, transferring money business?
So it's more than transferring money. It's more about hedging currency risks.
Yeah.
And I've lived in Mexico for about 7 years, and before I even moved here, I started building my own personal house in Mexico, and that was kind of the first time that I ever was exposed to currency fluctuations, right? Yeah. I mean, you live here, so you understand it. A lot of people don't, but I was building my house, and I would go to transfer money on a Friday, and the peso would be at 17 and a half, and the day before it would be at 17.9.
Right.
And it kind of drove me insane because the currency fluctuation was going up and down.
Right.
And I felt like I could control the peso with my bad luck.
Yeah.
And every time I had to move money, it just seemed to go against me.
Yeah.
And that's when I kind of just went deep into a dive of, well, how do we hedge this and make sure that we protect against those sort of fluctuations. So I took a deep dive and I kind of figured out sort of how to hedge it and the products that are used to be able to protect yourself against those fluctuations. And then fast forward a couple years, and I started building another couple houses in not Charleston, that's where I'm from, in Sayulita. And when we started crunching numbers on those houses, you put together pro formas and try to figure out what's this deal going to make. And the peso at that time was at 22, and we thought we were being conservative by using 21 to run all of our pro formas. And we all know what happened. The peso went from 22 down to 16 and a half.
Yeah.
And it ended up costing me, I don't know, on that one deal, about $150,000 in just currency fluctuation risk.
And that was hitting everybody across the entire country.
100%. Yeah. It was hitting everybody. But I was especially sort of frustrated and pissed at myself because I was one of the guys who actually knew what to do to be able to hedge it, but I didn't do it. Because access to those types of products were very difficult to get. It's super easy if you're a a big corporation trading tens of millions of pesos or dollars a year to be able to have access to those types of hedging products. But if you're just an individual building a house or buying a house for $500,000, $200,000, $1 million, it's very difficult to get access to those. And I didn't get access to those products, and that's why I lost all the money. But that's also why I was super frustrated, because I knew how to do it, but it wasn't there. So basically, based on that experience, I just said, we need to figure this shit out, right? Like, we shouldn't be exposed to this, and we need to figure it out so that individuals like me or you or anybody that's buying a $200,000 house or building a $500,000 house can hedge that currency risk. And after learning that hard-learned, expensive lesson, we basically started this company, MexEdge, to help people that were in the same shoes I was to protect them against that currency fluctuation, basically.
So before MexEdge, how did you move your money? What process did you use then?
Great question. So I used to use, when I was building my first house, I used to use Intercam. And, Intercam's great. Well, not really. But Intercam's fine, but they charge you an arm and a leg. I mean, they're charging you 2+% when you're moving that kind of money. And that adds up, when you're doing these not huge transactions, but if you're building $1 million house, 2% is $20,000, and that's what they're making sort of off the top. But I was using Intercam at the time, and they were okay, they were fine. But
so Intercam charges about 2%?
Yeah, I would say, it depends on the amount of money. It depends on sort of how smart and savvy you are. Like, if you know how to negotiate with the bank, you might be able to get it, down a little bit. But basically, 2+%.
2+%.
Right. Okay. So it's expensive, but I didn't know any better, so that's who I was using. Now knowing what I know, I look back on that and I'm like, wow, there's way better ways to not only move the money, but also to be able to sort of hedge and lock in your currency rates moving forward so that you know exactly what something's going to cost, so that you don't have to deal with the peso going from 20 to 18 to 19 to 16. You can protect yourself against all of that.
So tell me about how, using your company, MexEdge, that I'm not going to pay that 2%. I'm still going to pay 1%, I'm assuming.
Of course.
But how does that whole process work?
No, of course, you're always going to pay something, right? There's the interbank rate, or what they call the spot rate, and then there's the buy rate and the sell rate. And you want to get as close to the spot rate or interbank rate as possible. So with us, what we do, we can do it for a lot cheaper than a typical bank, but what we really specialize in is being able to guarantee a certain exchange rate for the future, so that if you sign a purchase agreement to buy a house, and let's say the peso is at 20 to 1, you're buying a 10 million peso house. At 20 to 1, that's a $500,000 house, right? But between the time you sign your purchase agreement and the time you get to the closing table, we know sometimes in Mexico it can take minimum 2 months, and that's fast, but it can take 3 to 6 months. And in that period, the peso could go to 18, and that house that you thought was going to be $500,000 is now $555,000 or whatever. So what we specialize in is eliminating that risk by locking in the exchange rate at the time you either sign your purchase agreement to buy a house, or sign, if you're building a house, when you sign your construction contract with your contractor, we lock in that rate so that you know exactly what it's going to cost, regardless if the peso goes to 5, if it goes to 30, regardless,
You lock
you
in
know
that rate.
exactly what it's
Right.
going to cost. Exactly.
Yeah, that's very well needed. So, tell me about how do you do that? And then, as somebody that is investing, how do they take advantage of this? What do they need to do?
So we do it through, like I said before, when I had figured out how to hedge all this stuff, but I didn't have access to those types of products. What we did is we have partnered with a couple different banking partners. One, a Canadian Forex bank, another money transfer, bank in the UK. And through those partnerships, and that's what we offer to our clients, through those partnerships, we can get our clients basically like individual private accounts with our banking partners that without us, they would never be able to have access to. And we get them access to those private accounts that then they can use to be able to lock in those exchange rates and protect themselves against it. So it's basically what we do is we offer access to something that they typically would never have access to unless they were a global multi-million-dollar company doing massive transactions every year. We get our clients access to those same accounts that those corporations are using. And it's kind of like bigger corporations doing tons of international trade, like they're smart.
Right.
They know how much currency fluctuation can affect their, whatever they're doing, their purchase, their import, their export, all that type of stuff. But it's important for just the individual buying a house to sort of take that mentality of the corporation and be like, well, why shouldn't I be doing the same thing that these corporations are doing to hedge their currency risk?
Right.
I should, as an individual, you should be doing that too. Right?
So I have questions because I've talked to a few people about your product. A lot of people are like, man, I wish I'd have known about this earlier.
I hear that all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I've already transferred $1 million or $2 million, in cases, sometimes $3 million, and I had no idea this would have saved me a ton because that was when the peso was going down.
Right.
But I've heard other people tell me, yeah, well, they asked for $50,000 or $500,000, whatever. I sent them $500,000 from my bank account. I didn't get charged anything, except a $40 wire fee.
Yeah, that's bullshit.
Okay, so explain that.
Okay, so that's bullshit, and the reason it is because banks will say, oh, we don't charge you a fee to do the conversion, but come on, they're banks. Of course they charge you a fee and they're making money. Their fee is basically baked into the difference between the spot rate and the rate that they're giving you. So let's say the peso's at 20. I'm making up numbers now, but let's say the peso's at 20, then they give you a rate of 18, which would be horrible, and they say, we're not charging you a fee, but of course the fee is made up between the 20 and the 18. They're getting paid on all of it. So when they say, we're not charging you a fee, don't buy that.
So what about in Mexico? I know some companies have like two different accounts, one to accept pesos in and one to accept dollars, right? So if you're sending dollars from the US to dollars in Mexico, do they take anything on that transaction?
There used to be USD accounts in Mexico, but they sort of changed that law. There are certain banks like Actinver that can get around that, but basically you can't really have a USD account in Mexico. And even if you could have a USD account in Mexico at whatever, let's say Intercam, and you could have a USD account at Intercam, at some point you're still going to have to move those dollars from dollars into pesos.
Exactly.
And they're still going to charge you on that conversion.
Okay,
right?
so you're saying even if you have a bank in Mexico where you can transfer dollars from the US to dollars in Mexico,
at some point
you have to convert that to pesos, and that's where you're going to pay the 18 instead of, get 18 instead of 20 and pay
And that's an extreme example. I mean, if it's a 20, maybe they give you 18.
Well, I was transferring money in the US when the peso was, say, at 18, and I would transfer it to BBVA or BBVA.
BBVA.
Yeah, BBVA. So I would transfer it, and I would get knocked down like at least 15, 20% every transaction. So I would transfer over, say, $10,000, right? And then when they did the conversion, instead of multiplying by, say, 17.5, which was the market, they would multiply by, like, at best 15, sometimes 14.9.
Right. No.
So I was losing big money.
Totally.
But they were smaller amounts. So so then I started using Wise, and Wise was less painful. But Wise could be a friggin' disaster as well, because with Wise, sometimes the money would go within an hour. Sometimes it would take a week to 10 days to get the money.
And Wise, actually, I'm a big proponent of Wise.
Yeah.
I think if you're moving smaller amounts of money, I think Wise is one of the best platforms with the lowest rates that you can use. It's usually quick, and so I like it, but it's usually quick.
Yeah.
Sometimes you never know,
right.
And like you just said, sometimes it goes through in 2 minutes, sometimes it's 5 days.
Yeah.
But in these types of transactions that we deal with, which are, $200,000 plus to, several million, if you try to move that kind of money with Wise, it would be a nightmare, and it would potentially take, I don't know, it could take you 2 months to be able to move that kind of money. It's a pain in the ass.
So where's the cutoff between where you would go transfer through Wise and then transfer through MexEdge?
So I still use, through the accounts that I have, I use those primarily, but if I need a quick $5,000, like, I will still use Wise.
Yeah.
But what we specialize in, like I said, is those sort of larger real estate transactions, and not necessarily real estate, other businesses too, but just larger transactions. So yeah, $5,000, I would still use our accounts through our bank, but if I needed to get it done in 2 minutes, I would use Wise and hope that it goes through, because it doesn't always go through. Right. But if you're doing a transaction of $100,000 plus, there's no question that and me personally, when I'm doing the same thing, that's when I use our banking partners to do it.
So if somebody needs to transfer money to Mexico now, is that kind of and they contact you and they're like, okay, I need to transfer $60,000. You're probably like, that's not really my wheelhouse, or?
We're a new company.
Yeah.
So I never want to tell people no.
Right.
We're always going to sort of work with them and help them figure out the best way to do it. And it may not be with us. And if they have a certain amount and they need it moved in whatever this time frame, I recommend Wise all the time. And say, what, this would be better just to use Wise. If you need help setting up that account, I can help walk you through it. But we still deal with transactions that are that small, because we're trying to grow our business. You never know. It's like that 60, and this happened like a couple months ago. Yeah. We had one client who was like, I only have one payment left on my house, and it's whatever, $50,000. I was like, yeah, it's below our normal thing that we do. But I was like, they were super cool people. Yeah. We did it anyway. And because of our customer service, they introduced us to 4 other people in the same building that were doing larger transactions. So it was worth it. So I never want to say no to anybody. Okay. But sometimes I will,
Now, do you ever see some automation maybe coming into your platform where you would be a competitor with Wise, or do you think that it'll always be separate?
Well, but here's the biggest difference with Wise. Certainly we handle spot trades, but our main business model isn't just spot trade transactions. Our main business model is hedging currency risk, right?
Yeah.
So with Wise, you can't hedge currency risk.
Right.
You can make a transfer, and with Wise you can schedule it for a date in the future.
Right.
But with Wise,
whatever the spot
is, then they take their fee.
Yeah.
That's what you're going to get on that date, which is honestly, in my opinion, one of the dumbest things you could do, because you might schedule a trade for a month out and you don't pay attention, and in a month out the rate is terrible that day or that week, and it's automatically scheduled, and you get screwed because you're not paying attention. With us, again, what we specialize in is locking in the rate for the future,
Right.
so that you know, regardless of what date you pick and regardless of where the peso is on that date, you have a guaranteed rate and you know exactly what it's going to be. And when we do that, it's cheaper than using any of those other banks, BBVA, Intercam,
Yeah.
whatever.
And then you also, I think we talked earlier that you can pay interest on that money. How does that work?
So great question. So basically what we use, or what the platform uses that we introduce our clients to, is it's basically a forward contract. And a forward contract, this is not going to get technical but boring. It's basically a legally binding agreement between two parties to buy or sell an asset, obviously in this case currencies, for a specific price at a specific date in the future.
Okay.
So that sounds technical, but all it is, okay, I want to buy pesos on this date in the future. What's the rate that you're going to give me? That rate, they tell you the rate and you agree to it. That's a forward contract. So back to your question though about sort of the interest and how this works, and this gets even a little more technical. Sorry, guys. But there are forward points associated with these forward contracts.
Right.
So if you lock in, let's say today the peso is at 20, and you lock in an exchange for a year, you're going to get forward points on that forward contract. So right now that's about 6%. So if you lock in the peso today at 20, in a year you're going to get it back at whatever that 6% is, 21.2 or something. So they come with those forward points. That's also why the USD to MXN is an interesting currency pairing, because Mexico's interest rate is always, hold on, let me back up and explain how those forward points are calculated, right? So they're calculated by the interest rate differentials of the countries that are issuing the currencies. Sounds complicated, but right now, the Mexican interest rate is about 10.5, or last week, actually, they lowered it to 10.25. The US interest rate is about 4.5, 4.25. So let's just say that difference between, or differential between those two interest rates is about 6%.
Yeah.
That's how they calculate the forward points that you earn on these forward contracts.
Okay.
So if you lock it in with current interest rates from both countries right now, you would earn about 6%. And it's an interesting currency pairing because Mexico's interest rate is always higher than the US. Right, exactly.
So you would never, your product would not probably be recommended to go pesos to dollars unless it was immediate. Unless you were immediate, yeah.
Exactly, because, well, sometimes we actually work with clients who do that, but it's the inverse. So, instead of earning 6%, which is about 0.5% per month, you would lose 6% per annum. So you would lose 0.5% per month. So if you're going from pesos back into dollars after a month, your rate would be 0.5% lower. Right. Versus the other way, if you're going from dollars into pesos, every month you're gaining an extra 0.5%.
Okay.
Sorry, it does get technical, but this is what people just don't understand. Like this whole sort of market or forex market or just business has historically been just shrouded in sort of opaqueness. Right. And the currency brokers and the banks, they like it that you don't know what's going on, right? Because then they can sort of charge you whatever they want and you don't know. But what we do is try to educate people and explain how all of this shit works so that they know what their rate should be when they lock it in. And with this all sounds complicated, and I don't want to overcomplicate it because the platform that we work with, when I say these forward contracts, a forward contract is just basically a payment that is scheduled in the future. So just think of it as a payment. And on the platform that we give our clients access to, it's super simple. Like it's not like you're signing some contract. It's just like Wise, where you say, I want to sell 10,000 US dollars. I want to buy Mexican pesos. Then you just hit the button and you choose a date in the future. It automatically calculates that rate. You say, okay, I accept it. You put down a super small deposit of like 10% to lock it in, and it's done. It's not like you are signing contracts and doing all this stuff. It's super simple on the platform.
And then how long can you lock it in?
So currently, depending for US or Canadian or EU or if you're a UK citizen, whatever, and have those passports, we can do it for a year, so a year out. With Mexican corporations, we can talk about that later, but with Mexican corporations, we can lock it in for 3+ years. But really our focus is on individuals. So with those individuals, we can lock it in for basically a year.
Okay. But a Mexican corporation like that's taking in dollars maybe from the US or whatever?
So kind of a side product of what we've done, and this is me just nerding out on currencies, like I'm a real estate junkie, right?
Yeah.
So when I learned about these currency hedging products, I immediately just associated it to what I do, which is real estate. But there's tons of other, businesses that use this type of hedging strategy. So once we started the company and we started working with just clients focused on real estate, we started thinking, well, shit, we can use this same exact product and you apply it to other industries.
Right.
So recently we've been talking with a bunch of tequila companies, right? Because they're manufacturing all their tequila here,
they're
obviously.
Getting paid in US dollars.
Right,
The US
and
bank.
then they export 90% of their product to the US, they're drunks.
Yeah.
And they're getting paid in dollars, but they're manufacturing, distilling everything in pesos. So,
and when they're getting paid, are they getting paid in US bank?
yeah, so they'll get paid in USD. So,
but does it go to a US bank or does it go to their Mexican bank?
it will come from the US.
So now it's coming from so you're just having them, so they would send an invoice and you say, okay, pay this invoice, but pay it through this platform. Basically, right?
Hold on, say that again.
So I'm trying to delineate, are they the tequila company?
So before they would sign a tequila contract, right? They're getting paid in dollars.
Yeah.
And when they get paid, whenever that is, they have to exchange it at whatever the spot rate is on that day, right? But with us, they say, okay, I've signed this contract, but now I want to hedge it because I'm comfortable with where the exchange rate is on that day.
Yeah.
So that then when they do get paid in dollars, they know exactly how many pesos they're going to get because they've locked in sort of their guaranteed rate, right?
Yeah, so my question is, when they get paid, is the U.S. company paying their U.S. bank account, or does the money go to their Mexican bank account?
Eventually, it ends up in their Mexican bank account, whether they have a U.S. bank account or not, but eventually it does end up in Mexico. And think about it, I mean, that's how they're Mexican companies, right?
Yeah.
So they're producing everything, their material costs, their labor costs, all that stuff is all in pesos, yet they're getting paid in dollars. So it all ends up in Mexico in their Mexican bank accounts, yes.
Okay, because I don't know why I'm hung up on that logistics of that. So
no, it's interesting stuff, though.
But it would apply to all manufacturers, I would think. And then even if you were just wanting somebody to, if you were just hedging dollars to pesos, I mean, I know some people, they're like, okay, I think the dollar is going to go to 30, right? So this probably wouldn't be a good, if they think it's going to 30, they're probably not going to want to do this. But if they think the dollar's going, to 15, they'd be like, yeah, I'm going to put in $10 million. I'm going to hedge it. So that when the peso goes down, I'm going to get 20.
Right. And you're exactly right. If somebody thinks the peso is going to go to 30 and they're confident in that, we're not the company for you.
Right.
But we still do offer upside because of the forward points that I talked about. So you're getting 6% per annum, right? So there is upside. It's not like you're locking it in and it's just flat. So you're getting 6%, But if the dollar were to outperform the peso by more than 6%, yeah, you might be losing some opportunity costs, but at least you know as soon as you hedge it exactly what it's going to cost.
Right.
So, people will come to me all the time and say, oh, but I think the peso is going to go to 30. And I'm like, okay, well, you're buying $1 million house. Are you going to bet $1 million on that? What happens if the peso goes to 10?
Right.
You're going to get screwed.
Right.
And are you willing to put your money where your mouth is?
Right.
And then people are like, oh yeah, maybe I'm not as smart as I thought I was. Yes, let's hedge it.
Yeah. It's a very complex. It's a very complex problem, and you never know which way it's going to go.
Totally.
I mean, I would tell you from my perspective, the decline in the peso. The softness in the peso is probably 100% due to U.S. financial companies not liking what's going on in Mexico, and they just decided to punish the Mexican peso.
Yeah, no, and I have a million theories too of and I've talked about this in other posts of why I think the peso went from when they called it the super peso from 16.32 up to now today at 20.42.
Yeah.
I mean, I have my theories, you have your theories. I'm not saying you're right, wrong. I'm not saying I'm right, wrong. But the bottom line is, whatever the reason, there is a ton of volatility, right?
Yeah.
And because of that volatility, that's why you need to protect yourself against this stuff. I mean, if there wasn't volatility, and that's interesting because that's why companies like mine, and we're, as far as I know, literally the only company in Mexico doing what we're doing.
Right.
But, before COVID, the peso steadily devalued against the dollar annually, right?
Yeah.
For 20 years, the dollar every year would get, 5%, 10% stronger. So nobody wanted to hedge it, right? Because it was like, well, shit, the odds are if I close in 4 months, the peso is going to weaken, the dollar's going to strengthen, and my house is going to be, less expensive because I didn't hedge it.
Right.
But that's all changed, and after COVID, I mean, like I said, in my example, the peso went from 22 when I was crunching numbers for these houses down to 16 and a half.
Yeah.
And that's where this volatility comes in. And that's why we've started the company. And that's also why companies didn't really exist before that, because the odds were that the dollar was going to continue to strengthen.
Right.
That's just not the case anymore.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of people, myself included, have gotten burned and lost a bunch of money.
Yeah, that's... Right. I know a lot of people that have lost a lot of money.
You laugh, it's not funny.
Yeah. No, a lot of people have lost a ton of money with that.
Right, totally.
So what is your percent that you charge then? Because you talked about some of the other rates.
No, great question. So we charge, and it depends on the size of the deal, but in general, we charge 1% of the overall transaction. So if you're buying $1 million house, our fee is $10,000, 1% of $1 million. However, then once our clients have access to our platform, on the platform, whether they're going into a forward contract or whether they are just doing a spot trade, the platform is only charging 0.5%. Okay. So with our fee and the platform fee, it's a total cost of 1.5%, right? So it's still cheaper at 1.5%. It's still cheaper than if you were to use Intercam, BBVA, Bank of America, Bank of Montreal, Charles Schwab. We're still a 0.5 point cheaper. And we're guaranteeing exchange.
You're locking in the rate, and you're paying interest.
And you're getting the 6% per annum.
Right.
This is going to sound cheesy, and I'm not blowing smoke up our ass, but we hear all the time, this is a no-brainer.
Right.
And I'm like, it is. But the problem is people aren't aware of it. Like they just don't know about this stuff.
So there's really three things that are unique, right? It's your percent is 1.5 total versus 2 plus the other ones. You're doing you're locking in the rate so that you know what rate you're going to get in the future, And then the third thing that makes you unique is you're paying interest on that money, and it's 6%.
Yeah.
Which is very significant. There's no bank in the U.S. paying you 6% on your money.
Well, and I want to be careful by saying we're paying, because no, we're not. None of our clients' funds or money flow through us. It all gets done on our banking partner's platform.
Okay.
We never touch anybody's money. The only money we touch is our fee, but we never touch anybody's money, so it's all being done on the banking platform.
So the money never goes to your account. It goes
never.
It goes
never.
to their account.
And we don't want, I don't want to touch anybody else's money.
And then does the do you have like one banking partner that you use primarily for these transactions, or are there multiple?
we have several banking partners, but we use them for different things. If it's a Mexican corporation and we're helping them, hedge and protect their currency risk, we use one bank. If it's a Canadian or European or American individual, we use another banking partner, but it's through this gets confusing, so I don't want to confuse people, but basically through our Canadian banking partner, we get access to this platform that typically people would never be able to have access to. Meaning, to have access to the platform that we give our clients access to, you have to do 50 plus million a year in trades, just in volume, to get access to it. But through our Canadian banking partner, because of the volume that we do, because of the volume that they do, then we can, we get our clients access to that platform. And that's also why the rates are so low, because they're getting, that 0.5% that I was saying, they're getting that rate because of the overall volume. Right. And they get to basically piggyback off of us and piggyback off of our Canadian banking partner.
Right. Okay, so the unique, we'll go off to the unique, I'll cover this again, maybe I'll cover it more accurate this time. Because like when I was going to, business school at Ohio State, right, working on the MBA, the whole thing was, how do successful businesses differentiate themselves? So when you're selling a product or you're educating people on a product, it's really those differences that you need to highlight. And so you have three big differences. And the big difference is you lock in at 1.5% versus 2 to 15% in some cases, like in smaller money. So that's a huge benefit. Being able to so you have a lower rate, you're able to lock the rate. That's another huge benefit that no one else that I know of can do. And you're able to get them interest of 6% when they do a U.S. to Mexico transfer. Yeah. So those are your three spades, basically.
Three, really, for those, summarized very perfectly. But the fourth is just access to the frickin' product. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Because nobody can get access to the product, without sort of us and our help and our banking partners. But yes, those three things, and the biggest thing is just access to those three things. Right? Yeah, and so we're definitely, we want you as a partner on our Boingo site. We also want you as a partner on our Making Mexico Home site. So when people come to our site and they need to move money, right now you're the only game in town that can do what you're doing. So I applaud you for everything you've done, and I think it's a great idea. And I remember I was in San Miguel. I was at my wife's aunt's house over the summer when we first talked, and I started explaining sort of the product to you. And some people get it, but it takes a lot of explanation. You got it immediately, and you were like, George, this is great. Yeah. And I'm psyched for the fact to work with all of your followers, and you have a big impact in. Well, I think manufacturing is where if I'm just thinking out, if I'm sitting where you're sitting, yes, there's a big market for high-end real estate, but that's really peanuts compared to the amount of money that it is peanuts. But the other thing is a lot of those bigger corporations. And that's what I was saying before. A lot of those bigger corporations, they already are hedging, because it's kind of if you're the CFO of a major corporation and you're Mexican based and you're doing tons of international trade, that's your freaking job to be hedging currency risk, right? So a lot of those companies are already hedging their currency risk.
Yeah.
But some of the smaller, niche industries like tequila, like these guys might be the most brilliant like tequila, whatever, distillers, makers in the world, but that world of finance isn't really their thing. So that's an industry we're working on. But a lot, not all, you'd be surprised, not all, but a lot of those big Mexican corporations, they're of course already hedging their currency risk. And that's sort of my point to these individuals.
But they're hedging, they're not.
Yeah, they're hedging. Yeah.
I mean, they're just hedging basically. So
right.
It's not like they're locking in a rate. They're not.
No, they will.
Yeah.
No, they will.
Okay.
And that's my point to our clients. It's like, if these huge corporations are hedging because they're smart and their CFO is like, this is what we need to be doing, that's what you should be doing too, even though you're not a corporation. And even though you're not a corporation, some of these purchases are the biggest purchases that these people will make in their entire life. They're buying $1 million house. Sometimes it's just cash, like they've saved up all that money. It's the biggest purchase they're ever going to make.
Right.
To not sort of hedge that and protect yourself when you're making that type of a decision, to me is insane.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I agree. I still think it would be interesting if you could ever get the data that would say how many of these Mexican manufacturing facilities are actually hedging, versus, and there's probably a cutoff range, right? If they're taking in, let's just say $10 million a year, maybe they don't have the whole infrastructure to hedge.
That's a great question, and I'm also amazed at some of the bigger corporations that we do talk to that I assume are hedging, and they're not.
Yeah, that's what my thought it goes. Yeah. It's like, okay, the more you're doing, the greater the likelihood. But even if you're doing $1 billion a year,
some of them don't.
Some of them may still be paying the 2% plus.
Right.
Maybe the bank's like, we'll give you intercamp.
Well, if you're moving that kind of money, you've probably got access to better rates and all that kind of stuff. But if you're buying a one-time house of $500,000, you don't have access to the shit that the corporations have access to.
Yeah.
Until us.
But I'm saying there's a lot of corporations I would think that are going to be, like. That say they're doing $10 million a year in sales to the U.S. It's probably not going to have. They're probably not going to have the best CFO in place to be able to do that kind of stuff.
Right.
So that's where I'm.
Right.
I think there's
that middle niche sort of. Yeah. No, you're exactly right. You're exactly right.
Well, I can envision a day where everybody that's moving money here, that's not already big and hedging, is going to move everything through MexEdge. So I think you got. I
hope so.
I think you got a great product, man.
I hope so. I hope so.
From my perspective, the interview is probably good. I'm just questions like when did you start the company?
So we started it. We're about a year and a half old.
Okay.
We sort of started it with the LVP, the least viable product, and I started it more just for my personal stuff. But once I had figured it out. I have a ton of friends like you. I have a ton of friends in real estate and developers. And once I had figured it out, I got approached by just friends of mine, like, "Hey, can you help me do what you did?" And that's when I was like, "This is a company," And that's. I mean, I don't even develop stuff anymore. All I'm doing is MexEdge. Yeah. I mean, think about it. The market is massive. Right? I mean, how many expats are moving into Mexico. You know more than anybody. Yeah. And, not all of those transactions are in pesos. Maybe even less than 50% are in pesos. But, even whatever, I'm making up numbers. If it's $1 billion a year, even if half of those are being bought in pesos, that's still $500 million a year. Yeah. And, we can help every one of those people hedge their currency risk when they're buying something. So the market is huge. I mean, huge.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. We don't have data here like we have in the U.S.
Data's tough.
And I'm trying to look at housing starts, and everything's just a guess, right?
Totally.
But in Tulum right now, there's like 500 new developments going up just in Tulum. And I should probably look at Boingo, because Boingo could tell me. Boingo can now I don't know if you've seen it at all. But,
No, I have.
But
It's awesome.
But we just did an upgrade, and now Boingo can tell you if the property is a development property or if it's a completed property. So you can go through and you can look at how many development properties or preventas are in, Cancun, Tulum, or whatever. But without looking at Boingo's data, we were, estimating about 500 new developments going up just in Tulum.
All right, so let's talk about just Tulum and those numbers,
Yeah.
right? And then we'll try to expand on that. So
Yeah.
just in Tulum, the numbers that basically this year, new projects that you know of,
Yeah.
how many millions of dollars is that just here in Tulum?
Well, I would so
For
first you have,
Tulum, Playa.
yeah. So
you
I
get-
would say in Tulum, I would probably use 20. So you have 500 developments, and I would use probably an average of 20. So some developments may be bringing in 300 or 400 or 500 houses. Some developments are going to be, a six bedroom condo, right? Small, especially in Playa, but not so much Tulum. They're usually bigger.
Yeah, but 500, if an average of 20, that's 10,000.
Yes,
And what do you think the average sales price of those 10,000 units is?
probably $3 million, or not 3 million. 300,000 would be my guess.
Right.
Yeah, so 10,000,
I'll let you calculate it.
What is it? So 300,000, 300 million, that's 3 billion just in Tulum.
Right.
Just in Tulum.
So that's Tulum. Then look at Mexico City, Oaxaca,
Yeah.
Puerto Vallarta, Cabo, Chapala,
Yeah.
San Miguel.
Yeah, every that's the thing.
It's massive.
Every place I've been so far in Mexico, every place is growing like crazy.
Crazy.
And it's, I can't figure out exactly yet who the forecaster is. I mean, but it's, there's probably 10 million houses right now being built right now.
Well, and people always ask us, are you going to go into other markets and try to do this?
Yeah.
And my answer is no,
Yeah.
because this is the biggest market, obviously, in the world for Americans or Canadians
Right.
moving to, we share a border. It's right
Right.
there. If I were to go to whatever, I'm making stuff up, but Panama or Costa Rica, most of those transactions are in dollars anyway. But
Yeah.
it's 0.001 of the market that's here in Mexico.
Yeah.
And when we saturate Mexico, if we did,
Yeah.
I would probably quit anyway because I'd be,
Yeah.
but there's no reason to focus on anything but Mexico because it
Right.
is the biggest market for
Yeah.
sure.
And that's why when we started Boingo.ai that we said, okay, let's start in Mexico. We are going to do every market. So Boingo will eventually do the world is the vision, but we started in Mexico. Because there was nothing there, right? There was no website that compiled all the listings, and then we said, okay, well, let's start in Mexico for that reason and the fact that there's so many people coming here to buy property, to live, to invest.
Interesting to watch what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're just, like I said before, and I'm not blowing smoke up your ass, but I really like your content. I like watching the shit that you're doing on Instagram. Whenever it comes up on my feed, I'm like, yeah, I want to listen to this.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I always agree,
Yeah.
but I always want to hear what you have to say, and it's interesting, and you've just got your hands in a bunch of different stuff.
Right.
And I'm kind of excited to see sort of where that goes, and you're a super smart guy, and yeah, it's exciting shit.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah. It's cool.
Yeah, it's fun. I just try to call shit like I see it, man.
Totally.
It's just
Totally.
This is what I see. I mean, you guys can, and here's some data. Does this make sense to you? This is what, But yeah, I run into women all the time that are, 60, 70, even 80 years old that have been here 20, 30 years. And they live in Cancun or they live in Tulum or they live in Playa and they go everywhere. And they've not had one issue. I mean, I repeatedly forget to lock my car when I go to the gym in different places, and I've never had as much as, anything. The only thing that I've ever had come up missing was I had a $20 metal cup that I left on the table at the gym outside, and I took Bear for a walk on Quinta for about 2 hours. When I came back, that was gone. But other than that, I've had nothing.
I agree with that sentiment in general.
Yeah.
Meaning, I think the media portrayal of Mexico being unsafe is kind of a joke.
Yeah.
But we live in very different places. You live here in Playa, I live in Sayulita. I would never leave anything, like I wouldn't leave my backpack on the beach in Sayulita or in a lot of different parts of Mexico.
Yeah.
I digress, but overall, just in general, Mexico, it's not as unsafe as the media portrays it to be at all. And you know what? Mexican, like, moms and dads send their kids to school and they're not worried about their kids getting mowed down in a mass shooting. And, you know, it's non-existent. Right. You know? So.
Yeah. And the schools, at least the private schools here, are much, much better, and they're not very expensive.
Totally. No. I mean, dude, my kids, I've moved here 7 years ago. My kids were in kindergarten. My kids are now in 6th grade. Yeah. They're basically Mexican, except they've got, you know, ridiculous blonde hair and they look like little beach rats, but they speak perfect Spanish. Yeah. And not only perfect Spanish, but they speak like Spanish with like a Sayulita beach slang accent. Like that's how good it is. You know, I don't know, I'm kind of proud of that in a weird way. Like I just love the fact that my kids have assimilated, that they've learned another language. And not only that, but they think that whole life is like normal, as they should, because that is their life, you know. But then I look at, had they grown up in the States, and I tell them all the time, I'm like, do you know how lucky you are that we get to go surf before you go to school every day? We get to do this. We spend so much time on the beach. And they kind of take it for granted. I mean, kids are assholes, right? Sorry, but.
Yeah, it's a completely different way of life. I tell people a lot that you know, it's the lifestyle here is so much different, especially if you're on the beach. And I also think that like the worst beach in Mexico is probably better than the best beach in the U.S.
Totally. You know, but we also live. We're getting all over the place here, but we also live in Mexico City. You know, for like 3 or 4 months of the year, and I love Mexico City, and my kids love it just as much. I mean, when we're there, you know, they're not like, oh, I want to go back to the beach. They're like, this is awesome. And then they'll complain, I don't want to leave Mexico City and go to the beach. And then they get back to the beach for the school year and they're like, I don't want to go to Mexico City for Christmas. Like, they don't realize how good they have it.
Yeah. No, Mexico's a beautiful place. And like, I mean, I've got...
It's the best.
Nothing. Yeah. I agree. So tell the audience, if they want to get some more information on your product, how do they find you?
Sure, they can find us at MexEdge.com. We're on Instagram as MexEdge. Email me, George@MexEdge.com.
Okay.
You know, we're on TikTok. We're sort of everywhere. Just remember MexEdge and Google it, and you'll find us. And reach out to us for sure. And you know, reach out to us not if you potentially have like a deal on the table. Like, reach out to us just if you're curious about what we've talked about today and how does this work. Reach out to me. I'll get on the phone with you for an hour and explain how this works. Like, I don't care. Our job is sort of to educate people on what we're talking about and currency hedging, because the problem is, our product is amazing, but it's not amazing if the client doesn't understand what the product is. So my job is to, you know, educate people on currency hedging, on, you know, what we do, and I'm happy to talk to anybody. So just reach out to us and we'll make it happen.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time, man.
No, that was awesome. That was awesome. Thank you, dude.